Hello, thank you for tuning in for Sealaska Heritage Institute's live Q&A about language revitalization with David R. Boxley. Yiskanat kla yuchat duasauk, yeth nahat sati akwan, ayachat yaktahit. My name is Rochelle Smallwood, and I work at Sealaska Heritage Institute in the art department as an art project coordinator. My Tlingit name is Yiskanat kla, which means mother of the chief. I am Akwan from the Big Dipper House here in Juneau. If you're interested in purchasing any of the artwork from David R. Boxley, he has a website which he can mention in his introduction, and we also have a link to some of his items we have for sale at the Sealaska Heritage Institute store online. The URL for that is tinyurl.com/David R. Boxley. And he has a print, a mask, and a blanket for sale there. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask David, feel free to type them into the comments and I'll be sure to read them off and make sure he's able to hear them and answer them. Thank you for joining us today, David.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks to Sealaska Heritage Institute for having me. Waiwa. Gibam lacha di wayu nach gibudi ero shumachlacha di watku. Look at Luam Goru, will the Achud Aygu da wasum Shagyan, then Lip Aygram at a Gola Lom dem Mortget. My name is Gibam Lacha. My English name is David Robert Boxley. I'm from the Wolf Clan of Metlakatla, Alaska. I'm really happy to be with you all today to talk about our language and our efforts to save it. Before I forget, my website is davidrobertboxley.com. This subject of language revitalization. So before I get into too much, can be a touchy subject. There is a lot of history behind why it's a touchy subject, and I'm going to get into what that is. So just to start off, how do they put trigger warning? So much has happened to all of our peoples, and it has caused hurt and shame in a way that sometimes it makes it hard for people to talk about. So I'm acknowledging that up front, and hope you'll bear with me, and I'll do my best to explain my journey, some information about Sm'algya, Metlakatla's history with our language, and what we're trying to do. Broadly, first of all, Sm'algya is the language of Tsimshian people. Sim means true or real. Alyach is language, talking. It originates at an area up the Skeena River around an ancient village called Emlacham, where at one time the Niska, Gitxen, and Tsimshian people all originated. Way back at the beginning of time, we were all one people. And after the flood, we dispersed down the Skeena and Nass rivers. The Nass people became the Niska. The people who stayed on the upper part of the Skeena became the Gitxen. And the people who moved down to the lower part of the Skeena and the coast became Tsimshian. And those three tribes speak, the root language is the same, but the languages have become three very distinct dialects. And there was a fourth called Southern Tsimshian that I think there may be only just a handful of speakers left, if any. I don't know as much about that language. So when the missionary came to my people, he learned our language first before he tried ministering to us. He didn't want to be misunderstood. He took, the reports differ, but anywhere from 6 months to a year to learn our language from a man who would eventually be baptized as Arthur Wellington, whose family is here in Metlakatla. And then he began preaching, and that trend of using our language continued for him all the way to our move over here from Metlakatla, BC to Metlakatla, Alaska, New Metlakatla. He preached in our language, spoke it fluently, and in his school, the school was bilingual. It wasn't until we had discovered from seeing neighboring communities that the education that our missionary was offering didn't go as high as other schools. We knew there was more. So we wrote the United States government asking them to bring in a school, which they did. The downside to that was that our language was then made against the rules. Children would be punished for speaking their language. There's a tragic story of a little girl who was being raised by her grandmother. Her grandmother didn't speak any English. And a teacher was walking by their front yard one day and heard her speaking to her grandmother. And the teacher took her up to the school, spanked her, and brought her back. When her grandmother asked, did they spank you for speaking our language? The little girl answered, oh, yes. And the teacher took her up and spanked her again. So I'm trying to do this in order because it's emotional even just to talk about. So my grandmother's generation was raised in that, where we were very convincingly taught that English is the only way to be a success in the world. And therefore the subsequent generations, whenever their grandparents were speaking, would either be shooed out of the room or told, this isn't for you, kind of thing. So by the time my dad came around, there were very few families left in the community who used Sm'algyax all the time. Thankfully, my dad's house was one of those. So he grew up speaking Sm'algyax. In his baby book that I've found, his mother writes that that little David is speaking Sm'algyax, speaking Tsimshian, we said back then. So my dad was raised with it. By the time I came around, my great grandfather, who was born in 1894, who he and his wife raised my dad, my great grandmother had passed away 9 months before I was born, and but he was around till I was 10. He lived to almost 100 years old. And so I got to hear Sm'algyax when we visit with him. And in the 80s, when my dad started writing songs, and the first adult dance group in Metlakatla happened, he wrote songs for that group. And then eventually our group, when we lived in Seattle, Tsimshian and Get Hon. So I grew up singing Sm'algyax songs and developed an ability to pronounce the words. In my teens, I used materials created by Donna Mae Roberts and her husband, Tony. And that helped push me along, increase my vocabulary. In my 20s, I helped my dad teach some classes that he did. And then in 2012, when I moved home to carve my grandmother's memorial pole, I got talking with my friend Gavin Hudson. At the time, he ran a little cafe, and over caffeine-fueled conversations, we got talking about the language and what needed to be done. And we got this dream of something we were going to call the Haq Foundation. But it was all pie in the sky ideas. And he said to me very bluntly one day, you got all these ideas for what our people should do. You better move home permanently so we can do them. Which was a very good guilt trip to be given. And over the next couple of years, it was really a matter of considering it. I had a career in Seattle, my carving career that I'm very attached to. And but one day I was standing in a gallery and I saw my work hanging on the wall with a little label next to it, said David Robert Boxley Tsimshian, and it just dawned on me, what good is this? What good is doing this if no one knows what the word Tsimshian means? If soon, that understanding is gone. Which all ties back to everything my dad tried to teach me growing up about how important all of this is. The art is just the surface. Art, even singing and dancing, for as important as that ceremony is, that's the surface. That's what everybody sees of a culture. It's all the stuff underneath that make those things possible. And the biggest of those is our languages. Northwest Coast people, Haida Tlingit Tsimshian people, are extremely similar culturally, more similar than different. And the thing that makes us unique, each of our peoples, is our languages. It's a whole different way of looking at the world, each of them, the way words describe places, the way we talk about our history, that it's all in that language. And that was actively and purposefully taken from us. And it's become, for some of us, we've taken it on to take it back. That's, how we feel about it. So in 2014, we established the Haq Foundation for real, thanks to Gavin Hudson and our other founding member, Candy McGilton, who, without whom we couldn't be doing what we're doing, because Gavin and I are good ideas people, and Candy actually writes things down and makes sure we're doing it. And then I moved home in 2015. We worked at the school for a while. We developed a 0 to 3 year old bilingual curriculum with our elder teacher, Mrs. Sarah Booth. Sarah had been the bilingual teacher at the school here in Metlakatla for 13 years, back through the 80s and early 90s. And she jumped right on board. I probably will talk about her a bunch during this, but Sarah is a saint. And even though she's, had been retired and all that, the language is so important to her that she jumped right back in. After that, we got involved with SHI's mentor apprenticeship program, and Candy and I signed on as Sarah's apprentices and worked for 3 years with her. I was starting out as maybe a high novice learner or low intermediate. Candy starting from an absolute beginner. By the end of it, I'm verging on low advanced, and Candy is for sure a mid intermediate. So it worked. Proof that mentor apprenticeship can work. So there's a lot of other angles to this to talk about. The biggest, and I think the biggest struggle that all of us who are involved in language revitalization go through is the long-term impacts of historical trauma on our people and the problems that the issues that those things cause. We've learned through all of this. I mean, I never imagined when I started trying to become fluent in my language that I would learn all of this other stuff about historical trauma and what it does. But they're learning now, actually with scientific study, that things like language loss, which is your very identity, and land loss, because land and language, those are the two things that make us who we are where we come from how we see the world, when those are taken from you violently, that causes a trauma that is bigger than any one person's ability to cope with. So it actually causes genetic damage. And then that genetic damage is passed on. So the old wives' tale about Native people being more susceptible to the effects of alcohol is just that. It's an old wives' tale. We weren't in those situations because we're Native people. We're traumatized and trying to cope. And then the traumas caused by that are also passed on generation to generation. And it's not, not just alcohol, any kinds of abuse, substance abuse, physical abuse, those things. It's not the total explanation for why those things happen, but it is a major factor. So that, and then that causes lateral oppression and violence. Because our people were taught to feel shame, were made to feel less than, there used to be signs in Ketchikan, no dogs or Indians allowed. It causes us to turn against each other. And our people will say and do things sometimes that make it very difficult to keep on trucking. It has, I just want to be honest about this because I think it might help other people. I've gone through a series of pretty deep depressions since I've started this journey. And it's funny. I was at an event in Fairbanks, sitting at a table with these Unungan women who had just gone through the process. They'd become fluent in their language. And they told Gavin and I, they said it's the hardest thing they ever did. And at the time I thought, yeah, I imagine, you can't be around lots of fluent speakers. It's probably constant work, it's probably really hard. I didn't understand what it was going to mean, and I'm still not done. I'm still kind of in the middle of this journey, but it has been the hardest thing I've ever done. You put yourself out there and you put a target on you. And it's not just me. Like I said, this has happened to absolutely everybody who has ever tried to make a change. That's the nature of that kind of act. You can be attacked for that. And but I have found that the benefits of what the language has done for me, just in my soul and my mind, have always outweighed those struggles. And we know that the trauma, the original historical trauma, and those generational effects can begin to be healed by the act of reclaiming your heritage language and culture. Singing and dancing is great. The art is great. But again, I've learned that taking that next step and going deeper, even though it's not nearly as glamorous as the art world, and I know that very well, I've gotten a lot of attention for what I've done with the art and singing and dancing. You don't have celebrate. I don't mean this as a criticism, but you don't have celebration for the language itself. You have celebrations so that we can get out there and show our pride by singing and dancing. But I've gotten to the point now that I understand that if we don't save the languages, the rest of it will begin to crumble, because it all sits on top of that foundation. It's just like with formline. There are rules to the art and how it functions and why it functions. And without those, the system doesn't work. And I feel like that's the same with our languages. Now, that statement, what I just made, I realized that that statement is a trigger statement for people who maybe don't have access to materials or teachers, or they might want to learn, but they're afraid, or they've been burned, in some situation, either made to feel like they weren't, I get this all the time, not native enough, or, they're not from the right family. There's all these things that are on our people that keep us from pursuing these things. And once you do take a class, you realize that it's really hard. To learn a language that you can't be immersed in, because it takes an effort just to get two speakers into a room most of the time. This is a huge uphill battle. And the thing I think one of the things I want to get across today is that whether you've been discouraged in the past or not, or you don't feel like you can do it, or you don't have the time, I want everybody to remember that it belongs to you. If you're Tlingit, your language belongs to you, no matter what else is happening. If that blood is in you, it's yours. For Chadkil and the Haida, it's the same thing, and for Sm'algya and the Tsimshian, it's the same. It's yours. And no one has the right to deny you of it. And it will help, even if it seems like a challenge that's too big for you. It helps. It's helped me a lot. Just a couple more things, and then I'll take your questions. I'd like to talk about the Haq Foundation just for a moment. I'm pretty proud of our very tiny little nonprofit. We've been able to do some cool stuff. We have a lot of free Somali materials on our website, haqfoundation.org. Haayk, Haq means spirit. We called it that. It was the closest thing we could get to thinking, to describing the language as the spirit of our people, and that we wanted to preserve that. We're on Facebook and Instagram. We've been able to work with the Smithsonian Arctic Studies Center. Candy headed up a project where we created a bilingual basket weaving curriculum, not only to preserve the terminology for basket weaving, but also Metlakatla has its own style of cedar bark false embroidered basket weaving that developed after our move here. And we wanted to preserve that at the same time. We've done translations for Sealaska Heritage Institute for their Baby Raven Reads program, and I'm looking forward to more of those Smalgyax versions of those books to come out eventually. I want to acknowledge some other folks who are really working hard on our language. Marcella Siksik up in Anchorage teaches classes and does online Smalgyax games. The Juneau Smalgyax Learners Group, which you can find on both Facebook and Instagram. They're run by Sirop Alfie Price and Manse Ndaka Degiet, Nancy Barnes. They have a faithful group that meets every single Saturday, very often online, especially right now. They've been doing it online. They meet faithfully every weekend, even when it's around the holidays. I'm so impressed by them. And the times where I've felt down, oh, I don't want to do it today, I don't want to, gone through those struggles. There they are. They're doing it. Well, gee, if they're still doing it, I better get up and keep at it too. So I shout out to them, for all of them. You guys are my heroes. There's a lot of Somali work being done in British Columbia. School District 52 in Prince Rupert has a website, smalgyax.ca, that has some good resources. One of our people, Michael D'Angeli, is up in Kitsilas teaching and working with fluent speakers. Here in Metlakatla, Naomi Leask teaches Tsimshian studies class, which includes a lot of Sm'algya at the school. Dave Nelson is a excellent resource at the school district. Elementary school teacher Jen McCarty puts as much Sm'algya into her classroom as she can. I'd also like to acknowledge some of my teachers, people who have influenced me. Russell Hayward here in Metlakatla was an advocate and a curriculum developer before it was a thing. He made a lot of materials, and his work has benefited us a lot. Arnold Booth was a mentor of mine. I got to spend time with as a teenager. And his wife, Mary, comes from the Eaton family here in Metlakatla. And the Eaton family has been a saving grace for our Sm'algya work. Alfred Eaton, the father of that family, would have been a chief if he had lived in Canada. Incredibly intelligent, fluent in both English and Sm'algya man, and a real inspiration here in Metlakatla. His children were some of the rare ones who grew up speaking our language daily. And it's because of that I have had a teacher these last few years. His daughter, Sarah, it's been really hard actually through this coronavirus that we haven't been able to work with each other. We're trying to figure out a way to make that happen though. She has been infinitely patient, kind, and again, thanks to her parents who made it a point to keep speaking their language at home. Her and her sister Burl are still fluent speakers here in Metlakatla who help people, help with translations, teach classes. And Metlakatla is very fortunate that we have one other fluent speaker, Mr. Just having a brain fart, Mr. Ryan. And he's in his 90s, and he's a wonderful man. And there's three. When I was born, there was probably 150. And it's just absolutely imperative that we keep, all of us keep doing this work we're doing. It is not up to the Haq Foundation to save anything, nor do we think we are. We're one small part of this big journey. And the other thing I'd like to add before I take any questions is the work that we've been able to do with the other language learners of other languages. The support we've received from the Khatkil and Tlingit community has really been helpful, and it's the times we've gotten to get together just to commiserate have been very helpful. And I want to acknowledge Kuyang Ben Young and his wife Marita for being good anchors for us. Dachjini, Khune, there's more. And every time I get on one of these things and I start talking, like, hesitating on Conrad Ryan's name or forgetting somebody, I'm just terrified I'm going to forget somebody and offend anyone. So please forgive me if I've missed anybody. It was not intentional. And so, one more thing before I hand it over. Where do we go from here? There are maybe about 80 speakers of Smalgyax left in the world. Most of our fluent speakers are in Canada. the accent difference between here and Prince Rupert and Loch Lambs and the other Tsimshian communities is minimal. There's very small differences in our pronunciation of the language. So we're able to utilize speakers, and in that I want to acknowledge Theresa Lowther, Velma Nelson, fluent speakers who have helped me a lot. My buddies Jeremy and Spencer over in Prince Rupert, and linguist Margaret Anderson, who has really been a help to us. That we need to organizations that have funding, Native organizations that have funding, that are able to fund this kind of work without restriction, need to do that. So many of the grants that are available for language revitalization that are provided from non-Native institutions have a lot of deliverables that have nothing to do with our goal of creating more fluent speakers than we're losing. You know, I'm very proud to say that I was part of a group of Haq Foundation and Sm'algya advocates that helped get Sealaska to pursue the course they're on now, which is offering major funding for language revitalization. One of the hardest things to talk about too is that until we're creating more fluent speakers than we're losing, we haven't won the battle yet. That's hard to talk about because so many of us are putting in so much time and energy. We're working really hard. That's no criticism of anybody. We need more help. We need financial help. We need more than pats on the back. Language revitalization needs a push, because like I said, if we lose our languages, man, that's the game. And we can't let that happen. So I'm using this platform to encourage any organizations that can provide funding that allows us to do what we know we need to do. You know, trust the people who are on the ground doing this work. Take our advice to heart when you're providing funding. Let us tell you what we need, and we're ready to do the work. So thank you all for listening to all that. I had a lot of notes that I hope I covered everything, but I'm looking forward to a discussion and answering questions. And I'll just end this part with a huge thank you to anybody and everybody that's trying or has ever tried to help with language revitalization. It's from the bottom of my heart, I thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. You almost brought me to tears a few times. I love what you said about how if you're Native, that language belongs to you. And that's really powerful, but it is really a struggle because of the ancestral trauma. I mean, you look at studies of mice and their parents are locked in a chamber of acetophenone, and then they're given shocks, and then the children, they'll just have the smell with no shocks, and they'll shiver, and then the grandchildren will do that. So with language, when our grandparents are in the orphanages being punished for the language, there's that, you know, like it's going to be painful, like we shouldn't be speaking it. And like my grandmother, her parents, they both spoke Tlingit growing up, but they kind of, she can understand it a little bit because she was used to it growing up, but they didn't teach her because they didn't want her to go through the same pain that they had for speaking it. And it's just crazy because like both me and you are our grandparents, they were able to speak our native language, and now us just a few generations later, we're starting from the ground zero, and there's only a few speakers left. And so it's so crazy that this language that was once ours is no, like, we have to relearn it again and it's almost gone. And it can happen that fast. So I really appreciate your work.
Thanks.
And it's a hard work for many reasons. And like I was watching an interview of yours the other day, and you were talking about, or a video, and you're talking to your students about how the Tsimshian words for these formline shapes are gone, and it just like I felt such a great loss for that. It's so sad. It would be so nice if they had those words still. But I love that you are working on curriculum with the basket weaving and able to save that. And um, I have a question, and you touched on this a bit, but if you wouldn't mind going into more detail, they're wondering, how does language work to help you overcome these traumas?
Well, I mean, my limited understanding of how it's a field of study called epigenetics, about how that damage is done by that extreme trauma, land loss, language loss. You know, those things are, like I said, tied to your identity. It's in the limited amount of scientific study they've done, it's been shown that people who participate in language revitalization, that take back on that sense of pride and understanding of who they are and where they come from, can heal those wounds. It's a matter of removing the shame and pain that were put on us, and replacing that with pride and identity. It's one thing to know that you're Tsimshian, Haida, or Tlingit. I mean, you can know that, you can understand on a factual level that that's where you come from. But also understanding that our people were very unjustly denied that identity. What it means to be Tsimshian, Haida, and Tlingit isn't just because somebody has certain melanin in their skin or that they eat fish. You know, being Tlingit is tied to your land and your language. Same with Haida and same with Tsimshian. I found that what my father was able to do for me growing up, being surrounded by our culture and learning more about why things are done beyond what people so affectionately called hoo-ha these days. You know, the reasons for dancing, why we have potlatch, why we have the relationships we have with families, you know, why grandparents aren't always just your biological grandparents, they're that whole generation. You know, that's an old thing connected to our culture and how the system is set up. By reclaiming what's yours, your language and that history, knowing the oral history of your clan or your people, I've found anyway, personally, that has given me a sense of pride and confidence that I know who I am, not just me personally, but who I am as far as how I, you know, where I come from in my family, my clan, my community, my tribe, and the greater history of Tsimshian people. That's helped me, and I'm not um, I'm not so special that everybody else can't have it too. You know, I've gotten attention for being named David Boxley because my dad is David Boxley, but that has nothing to do with anybody's ability to speak a language. My dad always says, not everybody's a carver, not everybody's a dancer, not everybody's a lawyer or a CEO, but everybody can speak. Everybody, we all talk. And those languages are ours to take. And if we're able to get past the roadblocks put on us, it's not each other's fault. We have to turn that gut reaction of wanting to criticize our neighbor and turn it back toward where it comes from, dealing with that trauma, accepting that horrible things were done to us and it's not each other's fault, and we're the ones we need to lean on to get through this together. Along with losing language, we started to live like, in our language, Amshiwa, Yatzhade, or Glade Ka. We started to live in that Western way. And I've watched us, even in my lifetime, lose that connection between family that used to be really close. All of the cousins, what Western people would consider distant cousins and all this stuff, that were, when my dad was growing up, the family that were in the house every day. Those losses and us moving away from that older system, I think, have done us a disservice. And getting back to that, and my criticism of that isn't a criticism of my own people. Again, I want to be clear that I'm talking about what was done to us, and we have the ability and the right to take it back. I feel it's my responsibility. And there are a lot of people who do too. And I don't blame any of our people for the situation we're in. But I hope people can start recognizing that when you have that reaction to want to be critical or jealous of your fellow tribal member for whatever they're doing, that we stop and ask ourselves, why are we feeling this way? Is it really because they did anything to me? Or is there something deeper that's causing this? And those are hard things to talk about. People don't want to talk about the things that make them feel that way. We're in a rough place, a lot of our people, because not only are we having to deal with the effects of this historical trauma, much of which most people don't realize is there, but we're expected to be modern 21st century people leading our people to the future all at the same time, which is incredibly unfair. But it's the cards we've been dealt. It's one of the reasons we're so funny. I'm not, but most of us are very funny. And I think that's a coping mechanism. I read a lot of old stories about potlatches, and they didn't seem all that humorous, but I think we learned to cope by being very funny. Yeah. What else you got for me?
I have to say that just sort of ties into this time we're in now. There's a lot of humor I'm seeing out there. I think anything people can do to help cheer others up. But there's a lot of silly stuff on the internet right now. And I never thought of that of being a coping mechanism, because looking at the old photographs, they do all look, very stoic. Maybe they just, but then maybe in some of the stories, there's, some of the Raven stories, there's a little bit of.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm probably exaggerating, but I do think it is part of it. Yeah.
I definitely think so. I never thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. And I have to say, I do love native humor. It's my favorite thing. I lived in London for a semester, and Thank goodness my grandma came with me because I was hungry for the native humor. I was so happy to come back home and then laugh with my mom. It's just medicine being together.
Yeah.
We have a few different questions there about beginners. So I'll just kind of ask both of them at once. So they're wondering if you have any advice for people who are just starting out, but maybe they don't have access to a fluent speaker or lost their connections to culture. And then also on a beginner's note, they are wondering for new language learners overcoming obstacles, how to keep encouraging them when they make little mistakes and keep on trying.
Well, for Smalgyax in particular, the Juneau Language Learners Group is a great place to get in contact with if you're just starting out. They're very warm, welcoming, kind, they're a gentle group. They're very serious about what they're doing, but their approach is fantastic. So as far as Smalgyax goes, people who are beginners, I think their group is a wonderful one to join. As I said earlier, the Haq Foundation has materials. We're working on getting more audio things up, which I know is important. And in that way, the smalgyax.ca, the School District 52 site, has some great audio, along with a online talking dictionary, smalgyax.unbc.ca. It's an amazing dictionary where you can search either in English or Smalgyax, and many of the files have, or words have sound files with them. So you can hear a speaker pronounce the words, and sometimes with an example sentence. Getting started can be really hard. And again, part of the fear or that hesitation, I don't think people realize sometimes it is connected to that old sense of, either shame or embarrassment that, again, isn't yours. It was put on you. It's not your fault. And that can be a stumbling block. I've seen it a lot. The other parts of that are just that it's intimidating. Trying to learn a new language that sounds are so different from English, that's hard. And part of it is the challenge is really, to me, this seems to be the biggest stumbling block, is to let go of the fear of making a mistake. Human beings have a natural inclination to not want to be embarrassed in front of their peers. That's a universal human thing. And letting go of that is hard. But if you can work on that and accept that you're going to be corrected and you're going to say things wrong, but remember that everybody does. Absolutely everybody. Even the people who are now, my generation, who are standing up speaking at events and things, they were in the exact same place you are at one time. And they had to get over that fear too. It's possible. If you are being, actually shamed or teased for making mistakes, then you're working with the wrong people. Don't be afraid to walk away from real abuse. But also don't confuse constructive criticism with an attack. That's something that I've had to learn these skills about how to talk about how to say things correctly and remind people that it's okay to make a mistake. No one's going to say it right first. And I'll give you a personal example. We were working with our teacher, Sarah, And there's a really simple word. We were talking about stacking wood, and the word is manteau. And I'm still probably overpronouncing the T. And she would say, nope, try it again. And I would just repeat it. And I kept overpronouncing this T. It was such a simple word, and I can say all these other things. But I want to say it so she's happy with it. I think that's maybe a way to look at it. Don't take it as a criticism, take it as a challenge. Like, I'm going to get to that. And it's okay that you don't get to it right away. It's just okay that you're trying is what's important, that you're making the effort. If everyone would just make an effort, we'd be in a better situation with all of our languages. And I would ask all the people who are involved with teaching to remember to have that patience and kindness for people who are just learning. But again, beginners, I'll just tell you right now, in the way the situation is for our people, where we're trying so hard just to create more fluent speakers who can be teachers, this is the hardest part we're going to be in. Eventually, hopefully, if we're successful, all your kids will be able to grow up in schools where we just teach the language and it won't be a big thing. Right now, it's really hard. So go into it knowing that it's going to be a challenge. I hope that answers that.
Oh, definitely. I love that you said just everyone's fearful. It's in our human nature, but we just have to keep trying to overcome that fear and put in the effort and hard work. And yeah, hopefully our grandchildren, they'll be raised with language again and it will be back again. So yeah. I appreciate all of our language people out there revitalizing it for future generations. It's really important and powerful work that you're all doing. And I have a question for you, and they are wondering if you have any favorite quotes from any of your teachers, like Sarah, Bossy, and Theresa.
Yeah, let's see. Theresa's great. Theresa's a firecracker. She said lots of amazing things over the years. My favorite, though, is just an expression that she says. There's a thing in saying in smalgyax, it kind of means like, oh, for goodness sake. But if something happens that's unexpected or amazing or slightly disappointing, you can take a part of that and just say, "Gori," and that's just, oh my goodness, or my heart. She says that really well when the situations arise, and I've always just found that terribly endearing. Sarah, we've had so much fun with Sarah. I don't know if I could pick one thing except that, and this goes back to what we were just talking about before, is she always says, there's always hope. Saving our life, there's still hope. And as long as we keep doing this, she's been doing this for a long time. And she always says, I'm going to keep doing it till I can't do it anymore. That's such inspiration for us. And we've made that promise to her that we're not going to quit, I'll end with Bossy, for everybody, whoever's asking this knows my teachers. Orlando Bolton, his nickname was Bossy, is Theresa's brother. He passed away now a few years ago. He was a chief over in BC. He was a big mentor of my father's and a really good friend to our family. And we were talking with him one day, talking with him at a restaurant, and we were just talking about the struggles of all of, what we're going through. And he said, and I'll extend this story to everyone working in language revitalization, because I do feel like this is a description of what we're trying to do. He said, there's a word in Smalgyax. He said, "Wishkwash." He said, you know what that means? And I said, well, it sounds like it means blue sky, but it's a term. He said, it's right after a storm and the first parting of the clouds. He put his hands like this. That first parting of the clouds and the bright blue sky shining through. He said, that's what you folks are doing with our languages. That's that, like the hope that Sarah talked about. And he said, so you just keep doing what you're doing. That kind of, I've been very fortunate that I've had those kind of teachers, Theresa and Bossy, Sarah, Arnold Booth, my dad, that have been encouraging and hard when they need to be, but always there. And something that is, with Bossy's passing, it's hard to talk about, but is a real thing coming down the pike, and all the more reason for us to be working as hard as we can, is that even when we're successful and we've become fluent speakers and we're making more fluent speakers, we're all still going to suffer the loss of that original unbroken line of speakers. And it's as if enough hasn't been done to us. So to me, it's a driving force for me that before that day comes, that I can be fluent in my language. Back to the question before about what do you do if you don't have a fluent speaker? You do the best you can. Again, that you're making an effort is the main thing. The other benefit to, especially what the Juno Sm'algya learners are doing, is they're very often able to get a fluent speaker over Zoom or something like this, So even though you can't be with them right physically, you can at least get to hear the language and ask questions and things like that. And Theresa lately has been working with them. I'm terribly grateful to all these people.
I love that with the blue sky breaking through out of the storm. I think that's the perfect way. And that goes back to what you were saying about not only our land being a part of us, but how we see the world, and just how the language really, just the way of thinking and the language, how you can sort of see back into how life must have been in their thought process. It's so neat. I guess we'll end on this last question, and it's a sort of a happy note. They're wondering if you have any funny stories working with fluent speakers or while teaching.
Yeah. When we were first working at the school, we were doing, we were transcribing things that Sarah was translating for us. And I can't remember the exact sentence, but the end of the sentence said, away you, which means by me, over by me. But I typed, now she had a screen in front of her so she could see what I was typing, so that she could verify that we had it right. And I just accidentally typed, and now where you, which means my butt or my behind. And Sarah just started laughing. And I didn't catch it at first. I thought, what is she laughing about? She told me what I'd written, and I mean, she was crying. She was laughing so hard. That's one of my favorites. There's been a few of those where, we've said the wrong thing or one day we were doing something and I, instead of saying, I like salmon heads, which like to eat, it would be tomaten to kausam horn. See, I just did it again. Oh my God, she's gonna laugh at me. Tomaten to kausam horn. I like salmon heads. I said tomaten to kausam horn, which is I like salmon hair. Yeah, no, we've had lots of fun. And that's a good way to go about it too, to be silly. Just yesterday, I was working. Right now, the Haq Foundation is working on transcribing an old Sm'algya Bible, which has preserved a whole bunch of old words, ways of talk, things that aren't used as much anymore, if at all. And so it's been just a treasure trove of those old words. But Gavin and I were discussing just a verse that we were reading. It was about not judging people. And we decided to paraphrase the verse, and he came up with Shagana hukdabum action, which translates to removeth thy judgy pants. Hashtag judgy pach, which is judgy pants. Yeah, so you gotta have fun. Even though this work is incredibly serious, what we're doing is really important. Doesn't mean it can't be fun. It doesn't mean we can't have a laugh, because most of the time you need it. And the other bit of advice that Hune Lance Twitchell gave us that I've really taken to heart is celebrate your victories. When you really have learned a word, or you've made a step up in your learning, and you understand something, or you've had a success, celebrate those things, even if it's just a bowl of ice cream. Take a minute to acknowledge those, because very often you're not going to get that acknowledgement from anybody else. So feel free to celebrate when you've got it. I think that's really important. So if we're all done, I want to thank Sealaska Heritage Institute for giving me this opportunity. This was my idea. I wanted to talk about this because even though I'm doing this artist in residency, so much of my life these days is about Sm'algya. I want to thank the Juno language learners again for being an inspiration. Everybody here at home who's working on the language, my dear friends and nonprofit co-founders, Gavin and Candy, for being a support system for me. Sarah Booth, who is just, I couldn't be more lucky to have such a kind, patient, and knowledgeable teacher. And my other teachers, Theresa and Bossy and Velna, and all my friends who are doing this with me, and my parents for supporting me in this. I'm sure there was fear. I know my dad had fear, knowing that lateral oppression was going to happen to me by making this move. My mom fearing that I wouldn't be able to pay my bills if I wasn't working on art all the time. This is the most important thing I'll ever do. And I'm grateful to SHI for its commitment to our languages. And I look forward to what's ahead, knowing that more struggles and more challenges will come. But if we, all of us, work together, this is a winnable fight we're in. And Hashago and dem Oich should gaat nis nusum will nach nusum da Oya Shagyan. I want to thank all of you for listening to me today. So Amtwalsham, make your names good. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you, David. David is our artist in residence for this month. And be sure to check out Sealaska Heritage Institute's YouTube channel, and he'll be dropping some videos on our channel here within the next week or two. They'll be dropping every now and then. There's already Meet the Artist video up, and I'm really excited about the topics he has to share. So keep an eye out. Thank you all for tuning in with us. And thank you, Sealaska Heritage, for having this opportunity to talk about language revitalization. Thank you all for your questions, and I hope you all have a great weekend.